Hello, everyone. Hi. Thanks so much for coming today. I'm Rochelle Diamond, and I lead our employee experience team here. And I'm also responsible for the LinkedIn Speaker Series. So before we get started with our fabulous speaker today, I wanted to just tell you a little bit remind you about what the LinkedIn Speaker Series is all about. As many of you probably know, we've had many great speakers over the past few years. Deepak Chopra, Sheryl Sandberg, more recently Fred Kaufman, Seth Meyers, just to name a few. But our main goal with this series is to really expose employees and members to innovative thinkers and inspiring ideas that will then in turn make them more productive and successful. Another thing that's very important to know about this program is that it really reinforces one of our core values, which is that relationships matter. We get all of our speakers through referrals and employee recommendations. So this is a reminder to all of you, if you have suggestions, preferably connections, to let us know. We have a wiki page at go/speaker series, so please let us know. We would be happy to hear from you. So with that out of the way, we are very happy today to host one of our top LinkedIn influencers. She has over 310,000 followers. So Gretchen Rubin, who if you read the title of the event, you know that she'll be talking about Breaking Bad and giving us some sneak peeks into the final episodes coming up. Yeah, just kidding. Actually, I don't think I'd want to know that anyway. But the title of her session is Breaking Bad Habits, that is. And she will be giving us a sneak peek into her forthcoming book, Before and After, which is about a framework that she's developed about the making and breaking of habits. And I think this topic is very relevant and timely for us as our in-day tomorrow, the theme is wellness. And adopting positive habits and breaking bad ones would do a whole lot of good for our collective wellness. So I want to tell you a little bit more about her background before we begin. A graduate of Yale and Yale Law School, Gretchen started her career in law, and she was actually clerking with Sandra Day O'Connor when she realized that she wanted to become a writer. She has written several books, including 3 novels that are safely locked in a desk drawer. Her blockbuster New York Times bestsellers, Happier at Home and The Happiness Project, are accounts of her experiences test driving the wisdom of the ages, current scientific studies, and lessons from popular culture about how to be happier. On her popular blog, happinessproject.com, you can see that up there, she reports daily on her adventures in the pursuit of happiness. Response to her practical approach to achieving happiness has been overwhelming. The Happiness Project is more than a book, it's really become a movement, a way of life. Psychiatrists are suggesting it to their patients, professors are assigning it to their students, book groups are reading it, families are passing it around, and groups have sprung up all around the world with people doing happiness projects together. I'm personally very excited for this session. I'm a huge fan of the Happiness Project book, and I actually credit it with helping me finally organize my apartment and declutter, so thank you very much. I know this is going to be a very valuable session for all of us as we learn how to break bad habits, that is, and really get to learn a little bit more about ourselves and how we can be motivating ourselves to improve our happiness and our overall wellness. So I want to remind everyone to please tweet and share your comments. We have our hashtag up there is InSpeaker, and Gretchen is at Gretchen Rubin. So with that, I'd like to introduce Gretchen Rubin.
Well, thanks so much for having me here today. Thanks especially to Rochelle, who set the whole thing up. I love being a LinkedIn influencer. It has been such an extraordinary way for me to connect with so many readers. So it's tremendously exciting, and I'm very honored to be included in the program. And also, as a happiness person, I have to say, if there's one thing that the ancient philosophers and the contemporary scientists agree on, it's that relationships are really like the key to happiness. And since LinkedIn is all about building and maintaining relationships, I find it very satisfying as a happiness person to be participating there. So I've been researching and writing about happiness for years, and finally one day it was like, yeah, habits. I finally started thinking about the importance of habits to our happiness. The fact is if you have habits that work for you, you are so much more likely to be happy, healthy, creative, and productive. And if you have habits that don't work for you, that's going to be much, much more challenging. And I think all of us have had the experience of trying, perhaps even desperately trying, to break a bad habit or to make a good habit. And oftentimes those are two sides of the same coin. Like you want to give up junk food, but you want to eat salad for lunch. But how do you do it? And it turns out it's really important because something like 40% of our daily life is governed by habits. So habits really matter. Now, as I was doing my research into habits, though, there were these big questions that no one else seemed to notice or to focus on, which were really weighing on my mind as I was trying to figure out how to think about habits. And the most important one was this question of well, here we are. Are we all alike? There was always this assumption that basically everybody was had the same aptitude for habits, that they had the same desire to form habits, that the same strategies would work for them, no matter what kind of person they were, what kind of habit that they wanted to form. There was no way to put myself in context or to think about the continuum of human nature. And I don't know about you, but I really do not believe that I need to run a laboratory experiment on a bunch of undergraduates at Stanford to realize that people are not all alike. And all the people in this room are not going to form habits in the same way. They're not going to have the same attitude towards habits. So I felt like I had to figure that out. So I made something up. It took me months and months to try to figure out how would you think about people and how they come to the very issue of habits. Because if you're trying to break a habit, what I realized for myself was that it's essential that you begin with self-knowledge. Because it's so easy to just butt your head up against a wall and try to do something and fail and become frustrated because you're trying to do something that doesn't work for you. Maybe it worked for somebody else, it's not working for you. So how do you understand yourself? And how do you understand yourself in context of other people? Like with happiness, say, there are all these scales and all these tests you can take. Like on the 1 to 10 scale, I'm a 7. So I know that about myself. But I had no idea of how people ended up with habits. So that is what I'm going to talk about today, to give you a sense of the kind of person that you are, so that when you're trying to tackle a bad habit or trying to foster a good habit, you have a sense of what kind of thing is likely to be successful for you. And also, very helpful, other people. Because when you understand where other people are coming from, how they see the world in a different way, you're much more able to create situations or circumstances that will help them succeed if you're trying to pester them to improve their habits or to break bad habits. So I'm going to lay out for you my framework, which I am grandiosely at this point calling the Rubin Character Index, but that might change. But anyway, this is the Rubin Character Index now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and briefly explain it. Then I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, because I think it'll be very interesting to see how everybody in the group falls out. And then I'll go back and speak about each category at a little more length to talk about how people in this category see the world, what are the pros and cons of being in that category or working or being in a relationship with somebody in that category. And then also, if you're trying to make or break a habit and you're in that category, how could you think about setting it up in a way that will help you succeed? Okay, here we go. This looks at a very specific part of your character. It is the question of how you respond to an expectation. Now, an expectation can be a rule, a deadline, a law, just a rule of etiquette about how people act. How do you respond to an expectation? Remember, there are two kinds of expectations. Outer expectations, which are things like a work deadline or a request from a spouse. And then there are inner expectations, which are like your own desire to keep a New Year's resolution, your own desire to get back into yoga. So here we go. First category, upholders. Upholders respond readily to outer expectations and inner expectations alike. They find it easy to meet a deadline. They find it pretty easy to keep a New Year's resolution. For them, these things happen pretty readily. Next, questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do it if they're convinced it makes sense. If they don't think so, they won't do it. So in a way, questioners make all expectations into inner expectations because they have to endorse the idea of whatever the expectation is. Next, rebels. Rebels resist all expectations, inner expectations and outer expectations alike. They want to do what they want to do at all times. And they have trouble even imposing an expectation on themselves. They will not, for the most part, impose an expectation on themselves. Finally, obligers. Obligers resist, they respond readily to outer expectations, but they have a lot of trouble meeting their own internal expectations. Like a friend of mine who said, you know, when I was on the track team in high school, I never missed a track practice, but I can't make myself go running on the weekends myself. That's an obliger. Okay, so we're going to go through, but there's one thing I must add. Questioners come in two flavors. Some questioners have a default to uphold, so they'll question, but they'll more or less go along with it. They're pretty easy to convince. Some questioners are very, very, very difficult to convince. If you can convince them, they'll go along with it, but their tendency is to resist. So questioners can look very different, even though they're coming from this questioner place. Okay, so first up, upholders who respond readily to outer and inner alike. I am 100% an upholder. Okay. We'll talk later. Next, questioners, whether questioners like Leo rising, with Leo with Scorpio rising, questioners with a tendency to uphold or questioners with a tendency to rebel, questioners. Okay. Next, rebels. Okay. Finally, obligers. Okay. Okay. Who here did not find themselves within the framework? They felt like nothing suited them. Okay, so no framework is really going to capture everything, but I think that this does a pretty good job of people finding themselves in a category. This is really interesting because what we saw here is absolutely representative of what I see because I've asked several big groups about this and what they find. This is completely unscientific, but just from what I can see. Questioners and obligers are by far the biggest categories. Rebel is the smallest category, by far. But here was one of the revelations to me that I came from understanding this framework and understanding my work on habits. As an upholder, I thought basically everybody was an upholder. I kept thinking, why can't people just make a schedule and stick to it? You know, like, why can't people just do this, do that? Turns out, I'm kind of on the freaky edge of things. And I've got other things of ways that I divide human nature. Well, it turns out I'm like a super freaky kind of person, which I did not know about myself. Upholder is a very small category. Rebels are the smallest, and then upholder, it's a little bit bigger than that, and then almost everybody is a questioner, or everybody else is a questioner or obliger. And I want to figure out some way of figuring out like what the actual breakdown is. It's hard to do. I have spoken into groups where there is not a single rebel. And it's exactly the organizations that you think would not be able to have a rebel. So where does this leave us? It turns out that this can be a really, really helpful thing as you go through the world. And so an upholder is motivated by fulfillment. An upholder goes and they wake up and they say, what's on the to-do list today? What's on the schedule today? And they like to just go through and get things done. They don't like to let people down. They hate getting in trouble or being blamed for things or making mistakes. They like to know what the expectations are, and they like to meet them. It's very satisfying to them. So if you're in an organization or you're working with an upholder or you are an upholder or you're in a relationship with an upholder, there's pros to that. Upholders are great if you need to know what the rules are and have somebody follow them. If it's important to be a self-starter, upholders don't need deadlines. They don't need late fees. They don't need a lot of scrutiny or supervision. They sometimes look for rules beyond the rules in things like art or technology or ethics. They say, these are the rules everybody's talking about. What are the rules beyond the rules? But like all of these categories, there's a dark side. There's the pro and the con. All of these categories include people who are very successful and people who are big losers. All of these have pros and they have cons too. And the negative side of being an upholder is to be too driven by the gold star, to have it be too important to know what the rules are, to be boxed in by the rules. There's almost kind of a paranoia that can set in for upholders. You know, what's expected of me? What am I supposed to do? They can become overwhelmed and paralyzed if it's not clear what expectations are, if it's ambiguous what you're supposed to do. And when it comes to making and breaking habits, it turns out that upholders really have a relatively easy time for it. And in fact, what I've noticed is that if you look at the people who are giving advice about how to make and break habits, they're all upholders. It makes perfect sense, because we're the people, we love habits, we're attracted to them, and we find it pretty easy to keep them. So that's the upholder. That it's easier if you're an upholder. Next, the questioners. Now, questioners wake up in the morning and they think, what needs to get done today? They are very motivated by sound reasons. They want to know that there's reasons for what they're doing, that what they're doing makes sense, that it's logical. And they hate anything that's arbitrary or that isn't fair. And for some reason, also, they have a weird thing about waiting in line. I haven't really figured that out. The questioners seem to have like this weird hatred of waiting in line. Now you can see, again, like with the upholders, there's obvious pros and cons. If you're in an organization or if you're with a questioner, there's a lot of, they are intellectually engaged. They love research, they love information, they love reasons. It can be incredibly helpful because they're going to say, well, you say this report is due on Friday. I mean, why is it due on Friday? Why are we doing a report at all? Why are we doing it this way? Who says? And that can be very, very helpful. And they can be, and if they make up their minds to do something, they're very good at sticking to it. Downside, it can be tiresome. Questioners can be tiresome for others, and they find it tiresome for themselves. They will often say, I wish I could give it up. I wish I could just let it go, but I can't. I have to keep going and going. And other people get exhausted by it, like, gosh, the team has decided, give it up, move on. This is what it is. And also, they can sometimes become paralyzed when they feel like they don't have perfect information, which is often not realistic. Now, when it comes to making a good habit or breaking a bad habit, it's very important for questioners to feel like they know why they're doing what they're doing. So, for instance, I have a friend who's a questioner who had cancer, and he was not convinced by what his doctor was telling him to do. So he didn't do it. Was this a healthy thing to do? Probably not. But he wasn't convinced. And so if you're trying to help a questioner make or break a bad habit, or if you yourself are the questioner, it's very important to take the time to put yourself through the paces to understand what you're doing. Now, I do this very crazy strength training routine at a gym, and one of my trainers said that he is a guy who's been training there for years. Every time he comes in, he's like, why are we doing it this way? Why are we doing it that way? And that's how he keeps himself coming, is he has to agree and decide that this makes sense. This is the right way to do strength training. So that's how a questioner would approach it. Next, rebels. Rebels wake up in the morning and they think, hey, what do I want to do today? They're completely motivated by present desire. They want to do what they want to do. And they are very likely to resist if someone else asks them or tells them to do something. In fact, they are very likely to want to do the opposite if someone asks them or tells them to do something. Now, this can be incredibly helpful. In certain situations, like you want to think outside the box, a rebel's going to think outside the box. You want somebody to break the rules, they love to break the rules. They love disruption. They love lawlessness. They're attracted to it, and they thrive in it. And they're also very authentic. They're doing what they want to do. They're very much in touch with what they want. And that can be great. But you can also imagine that it's pretty frustrating to be with somebody who, if you ask or tell them to do something, is going to do exactly the opposite. And this can get to the point with some rebels where I say, oh my gosh, read this book, you're going to love it. You'd be like, I'm not going to read it. I hate it. Rebels will, have this spirit of resistance that can be very, can be difficult, and it can also almost allow them to be controlled because they have such a strong desire to do the opposite sometimes of what people tell them. Now, when it comes to making and breaking a habit, you can imagine that this is a little bit of a challenge, because if you say something like, I really think, the doctor says you really need to exercise, you're like, I'm not going to exercise. He's not the boss of me. So how do you do it? So you've got to be very careful if you are a rebel, or if you're working with a rebel, to help them to make sure that you don't set off exactly the opposite of what you want. Somebody told me a funny story. So her father was a rebel, and they went to the doctor, and he was supposed to take blood pressure medication. So, the doctor's explaining why, and they walk out, and her father said, so do you think I should take the blood pressure medication? And she said, no, I wouldn't bother. He's like, what? You want me to die? And then he took it. Now, some rebels are really able to use their rebel energy to create habits, but they have to do it in a rebel way. So, for instance, I know a couple of rebels who managed to make themselves exercise regularly, which is kind of the opposite of what you would think a rebel would be able to do. So I said, how did you do it? How did you get yourself to do it? And both of them used very similar strategies, which was they focused on the present enjoyment. They didn't, like as an upholder, I would say, 3 days a week I'm going to run. They don't do that. They say, I'm waking up today, and I feel like running, and I love running, and I love the feeling of the air rushing past my ears. True thing. That's one of the things he said. I had never noticed the air rushing past my ears in all my life. It's my chance to listen to music. It's my chance to be free. Interesting, one rebel said, I'm free from having to pay for a gym. So she tied the idea of running to the idea of freedom. So that's the way as a rebel you can do these things, is by focusing on why you want to do it, why it's a choice that you're doing it, because they're so motivated by the idea of freedom and choice. Finally, obligers. Obligers are motivated by external accountability. They wake up in the morning and say, what do I have to do today? They don't like being blamed. They don't like letting people down. They like to meet external obligations, but they have a very, very, very tough time holding themselves accountable. And so the key for obligers is to create those systems of external accountability, whether you're working with an obliger or you're an obliger yourself. Now, the thing about obligers is, like, these people, obligers are the rock. These are the people that show up. These are the people who come through. These are the people who volunteer when no one else is volunteering. So they will deliver for others. Obligers themselves are the ones that, for the most part, bear the negative consequences of being an obliger. They say things like, I'm a people pleaser and I don't like it. Or, why is it that I can always make time for other people's priorities, but I can never make time for the things that are important to me? The secret is external accountability. There have to be those systems in place, or they just don't deliver. Like a friend of mine who was like, oh, for years I wanted to take yoga. I never did. Finally, I signed up for a yoga class. I went one time. It was the $600 yoga class. And I could have told her, I was like, you're an obliger. You had to create some kind of system of external accountability. Like, go with a friend who's going to be really annoyed if you don't show up. Or, go to an instructor who's going to hound you by email if you don't show up. Go to a class where they charge you triple if you're a no-show. Like, create systems of external accountability. And that will help. And again, when trying to make habits and break bad habits, obligers need to think of ways to get that sense of external accountability. And some people are super creative with it. For instance, I know somebody who wanted to take piano. And she said, well, I knew I would never practice piano, so I signed up with my children, and they'll know if I don't practice. So she had to do it because of her obligation as a role model. Or I know a guy who was taking photography, and he said, well, I knew I would never do it. I would never stick to it. So I decided that every semester I would sign up for one class at the International Center of Photography. And he said, and I did that for several semesters, and I was taking tons of pictures, and I loved it. And so finally I said, oh my gosh, I totally know what I'm doing. I love doing it. I don't need to bother taking a class. Guess how many photographs I've taken since I stopped taking a class? 1. Like, the systems of external accountability are super, super important. So 2 last really quick points, and then we'll open it up for questions, which is always my favorite part. One is, you can never look at a habit and say, well, somebody in this category, or I'm a this, or somebody else is a that, so I could never have that habit because it's too difficult. Because from what I've observed, everyone can get to these places, but they have to come to it from their own framework of mind. So, for instance, I'm one of these low-carb fanatics that you read about. You know, I read Gary Taubes' book, Why We Get Fat. Overnight, I changed everything that I ate except for leafy green vegetables. So I am really, really serious. No sugar, no wheat, no rice, no potatoes, you know, no starchy vegetables. You know, I basically don't even eat fruit. So I'm really hardcore. And as an upholder, I like that. Like, I know the system, I understand it. I like keeping the rules very rigorously. That satisfies my upholder self. I have a friend who's a rebel. He eats the same way. He gets there as a rebel. I'm not going to be manipulated by the food companies. I reject the conventional wisdom about whole grains. I'm part of this, you know, group of people who are secretly figuring out the, you know, the secret to good health. And so he gets there as a rebel. I get there as an upholder. My father follows it too. He's a questioner, and he's constantly reading the studies, the research, all the writing on it. He likes it because he feels like it's constantly answering his questions, why am I doing this? So we all have the same behavior, but we come to it from very, very different places, very different perspectives. And the last thing I would say is people, you know, I made up this framework, so I'm like the leading authority on it, I guess. And people are often like, well, Gretchen, isn't it possible to be an obliger at home, but be an upholder at work? Or I'm a rebel sometimes, and then other times I'm, no, I don't really think so. I mean, I really think that these are really foundational about the whole way you see the world. And the more that I talk to people in all the 4 categories, the more it seems like this is really, really hardwired, and really, really a universal part of your character. However, it is absolutely true, and I certainly have experienced this myself, that with time and experience and what, you know, we hope is greater wisdom, people learn the limitations of their category and they begin to understand how to counterbalance it. Certainly, I know that as an upholder, I have learned through hard experience to question and to say, you're telling me that I should do this. Should I do it? Is it right for me? Do I want to do it? Now, my husband is a questioner with upholder tendencies. And it's very helpful for me because I will go to him and I will say, the school says I have to do this. Do I have to do that? Because I really feel this very strong urge to do everything I'm told to do and meet every expectation. He'll say, no, you don't have to do that. And that helps me to say, that's right. Just because other people expect me to do it doesn't mean I have to do it. And, you know, questioners will say, oh, I've learned, you know, sometimes if the team's decided, I just have to let it go. Rebels will see, sometimes I just have to do something because it's important to somebody else. Obligers become very creative in figuring out ways to create external accountability for themselves so they can do the things that they want to do for themselves. So the last thing I would say, and then we'll have questions, is I really do believe that when you're trying to break these bad habits and build good habits, it's really helpful to spend a lot of time just thinking about yourself and your own nature. Because the more that what you try to do is in harmony with your own nature, your own interests, your own values, you know, the easier it is going to be to make these changes that are really going to help us be productive and successful and happy. So thank you. Okay, first question. Yeah. And if you have to sneak out, don't worry. A question that people often ask me is, how do I change XYZ person? And the fact is you can't change them. That's the problem. You can only change yourself. It's very sad. Yeah.
Hi. I have a question from the stream.
Oh, yeah, great.
So once you figure out which of these perspectives you have, do you find it easier to make yourself do things that you should do? For example, going running or eating healthy?
Yes, absolutely. No, I think that's a key because once you know what your type is, then you can figure it out. As I said, like with the rebel, thinking about why they want to eat that way, how it's a reflection of freedom and choice is going to help. Whereas with an upholder, with an obliger, it's all about the external accountability. So I really do think that it's a key. It's really key information when you're forming a habit, so that you can do it in a way that makes sense for you. So often with habits, it's just like you read something in a magazine or your friend tells you to do something, and you try it, and it doesn't work for you. It's because people are so different from each other.
So you've tied rebels to a very clear value system. You mentioned several times how they're motivated by freedom.
Yes.
I'm wondering for the other groups, like what would you say like that core value system is for a questioner, an upholder, obliger?
So with an upholder, I think it's this idea of fulfillment. Both fulfillment in terms of like the satisfaction that you have when you get something done, like that sense of fulfillment, but also fulfillment like like factory fulfillment, like done, crossing it off the list. So they get tremendous satisfaction from that. Questioners that sound reasons, like they don't want things to be arbitrary. Like the worst thing you can say to a questioner, like the worst thing they can say is that something's arbitrary. Often if you say to a questioner, do you keep a New Year's resolution? They'll say, I will keep a resolution, but I won't do it on New Year's Eve because that's arbitrary. So I always do it on the day that I want. So they want to know, they want to have reasons. And then obligers, it's all about external accountability. They're motivated by doing what's expected of them.
Thanks.
A couple more from the stream. If someone suffers from depression, do you think that overrides their habit structure, or does it make it even more ingrained?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Now, when I talk about happiness, I always talk about just sort of the ordinary range of happiness and unhappiness, because I feel like depression is really a third category, which demands urgent attention and is super, super serious. And it's kind of its own thing. I will say, apart from depression, one of the interesting things about unhappiness and habits is that when people are under stress, they revert to their habits. Now, a lot of times people assume that they would revert to bad habits. That is not the case. They revert to whatever habit is more habitual. So people who eat healthfully eat more healthfully. People who eat badly eat worse. People who read the newspaper, like when they did a study of university students, people who usually read op-ed pages spent more time reading op-ed pages and people during exams, and people who didn't do it did it even less. And so your habits, the habits that you put into place, then when you're under significant strain, like something like depression, they might rush in. Now, but I wouldn't speak specifically to depression because that is really a serious, that's its own field of study. But like, for instance, my outfit. I wasn't exactly sure what to wear here. And it's like, and my agent said to me one time, she's like, I never want to see that jacket again. Every time I see a video of you, you're wearing that jacket. No more. But I couldn't figure out what to wear. And I was like, oh, I want to wear that jacket. Because that's my habit. That's my decision-free thing. And so here I am wearing it. Because it's like when under the stress of making a decision the night before I had to pack, I was like, I reverted to my habit. So good habits will help you. Bad habits won't.
Okay, do you expect that rebels will actually take this advice?
Well, the questioners always come up and say, I question the validity of the Rubin character index. Yeah, the rebels, it's interesting because rebels always want to feel like there's nobody like them. They are totally unique. So the fact that they're in a category, they don't really like. But the advice that I have for rebels is almost like non-advice. It's almost like back away and let them think about it. I think that it could be helpful for them to see how they might be igniting the opposite reaction, or how people around them with the best of intentions could be undermining their efforts. For instance, if you said to a rebel, it is so great that you're doing exactly what your doctor said, the rebel is going to want to do it less. That kind of praise would work on an obliger and upholder, maybe a questioner. For a rebel, it's like it just makes them so much want to do the opposite thing. So I think just by understanding the mechanics of what's going on could help rebels do a better job managing themselves.
Hi. I actually have a question about the Happiness Project.
Yes.
I loved reading the book, as I had mentioned before, and there's so much good stuff in there. I was so impressed that you did all of those things over that year, and it was a little overwhelming actually to me.
Yeah.
How could you actually do
No,
all of
yeah.
that?
It's like I do all that so you don't have to.
Yeah.
You just pick out 3 things. Yeah.
So I was just wondering, after that project, were there things that kind of rose to the top that were like the things that you still do, or that were really the most impactful for you?
Almost everything I did in that book, I still continue to do because it all makes me happier. And I also picked things that you could really do, that were very manageable. So almost everything that I did, I still do. Just about. But now I understand why that's easier for me than for a lot of people, because I'm very rule-oriented and I like having these, and it makes me feel happy to go through and get all these things, whereas other people didn't. But yeah, no, I found that most of it, I just keep up with it because it really is effective.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Hi. So you mentioned your and your husband's categories. Do you think there's a perfect or ideal combination for personal or for work relationships?
Well, this is interesting. I'm glad I meant to mention this because I just think this is fascinating. All the rebels that I know who are married to obligers. I've never met a rebel married who is not married to an obliger. And I gave a talk and I mentioned that, and this woman came up to me later and she was like, I'm a total rebel. My last 2 boyfriends have been obligers, and it's great to have somebody who will give you a back rub whenever you ask for it, but I don't respect them, and so then I break up with them. So am I doomed to a life of loneliness? I'm like, I don't know. Write me in 5 years. Tell me how it turns out. Because every rebel I know is married to an obliger. I do think that there are pairs that could be successful or less successful. I have to, and I hope it comes through that I'm coming from a very particular place. Like, I'm an upholder, and like, I realize how much that colors the way that I see the world. As an upholder, I don't think that I could be married to anyone who was not an upholder or a questioner with upholder tendencies. It just makes me too anxious, and I just don't like it. I have friends. I'm in relationships with people who are in those categories. I think being married to a person like that would be very, very difficult. But then other. So I think it's a question of what the 2 categories are, and how they interact. But you can easily see how some would be more difficult. I have a friend who's an upholder. She's married to a questioner with rebel tendencies, and it's a big point of conflict for them. So I haven't really like mapped it out, but I think it's very clear that there are certain ones that would be more successful than others. And also career choices. Oh, just one last thing. Like, somebody emailed me, he goes like, well, now I understand why I hate my job. I'm a questioner and I'm a tax accountant. And it drives me crazy because all it is a bunch of arbitrary rules that don't make any sense. And he's like, now I realize I have to change my job. So I was like, okay, yeah, there's something else better for you. Yeah.
Based on your experience and work with this, have you seen any trends in terms of the origins of what we are? So is it something we're born as a rebel, or through experience we become a questioner?
Well, one of the things, my approach to the world is I'm not very interested in origins or why people are the way that they are. I just sort of see what's there. I really believe that this is something that's very hardwired, though. I really think people come out a certain way. I think this runs so deep that it would be unlikely that someone could fundamentally be changed. However, there is something, though, with obligers. And I wonder if this is a place where nurture or circumstances might bring something out more or less. There is often a streak of rebellion that runs through obligers. And they'll be very accommodating, and then all of a sudden, almost like out of the blue, they will just put their foot down and refuse to do something, like with no warning, and just, why this? Why now? Why are you refusing to do this? It's like they snap, and then the next thing. And so I think that this is something where if they're in a circumstance where a lot is required of them, that rebellious streak might come out in a more dramatic way. Whereas if they didn't feel so pressed, maybe it would stay more underground. But I do think that these aren't such a nurture thing. My sense is that they are pretty hardwired.
Thanks.
Hi. So I love having good habits. I'm always working towards having better habits, but I know...
Are you an upholder?
I think I'm more of a questioner.
Okay.
Yeah. But I know someone who really, he doesn't even try to fix his bad habits because he thinks, well, everyone has to have vices. Like, why would I fix these bad habits? And I'll probably just develop other bad habits because I can't be perfect.
Right.
So, like, is he that much of a questioner that he just, like, doesn't even... He's like questioning the value of fixing bad habits, or is he
well,
like
if he wanted to change a habit, could he? Like, could he keep it? Could he keep if he really wanted to, or does he say, "I want to do this, but I can't. I want to do this, but I'm unable to make myself"?
He doesn't even say I want to. He's like, well, probably it would be better if I fixed it, but like, why bother?
Why bother? Yeah, that sounds like. I mean, then it's maybe they're understanding the rationale of like, why would you do it? I have to say that in this book, Before and After, my favorite section in the whole book is about loopholes, because we're like cell phones looking for a signal. It's like, what's my loophole? What's my loophole? Why don't I have to do this? Why, this is an exception. Special day, my birthday. I'm on vacation. I'm out of town. My foot hurts. And there's 10 categories of loopholes, and one of those categories is what I would call fake self-actualization, which is things like, I only live once. I need to embrace myself for the way that I am. Or lack of control. If I gave up this habit, I would just get another bad habit. That's also questionable assumption. Is that true? Is it true if you give up one bad habit, another one leaps up to take its place? Probably not, unless you decide that that's what's going to happen. Often research shows that if you change one habit, you get kind of a cascade of good habits that, like, even weird things like saving more money helps people with anger management. Like, it seems like these things build on each other. But certainly if your attitude was like, well, I know that if I give up smoking, I'm going to gain 20 pounds from eating ice cream at night. I mean, it might very well become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I don't think that is, I think there's a lot of things that could be going on with that attitude that could be probed.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh my gosh, I love the loopholes. It's hilarious. I have 1,000 loopholes, yeah.
So, hi. In a lot of happiness literature, I read about the concept of flow. I'm sure you've heard of that guy whose name I can't pronounce.
Yeah, Mihai. She sent Mihai.
Thank you.
Yes, I practiced for like a half an hour. Yeah.
I'll have to do that. And so I wondered, have you seen a connection between forming habits and flow? That, the act of doing something that you love, that you're so engaged in, you forget your sense of time. Is there a connection to flow? And is that why habits are connected to happiness?
That is such an interesting question. I've never, ever heard anybody make that connection. That is so interesting. Because the thing that happens with habits is they happen without, you don't have to consciously think about them. And so they free up the mind for other things, because you're busy brushing your teeth, but you can be thinking about Einstein's theory of relativity because you don't have to think about brushing your teeth. So that's what. And the same thing with flow is about this immense concentration, and like surgeons will talk about time stopping or hands working on their own. And so I think the more, probably if you look, I've never thought about this before, it's a very insightful question. Probably if you look at people who go into flow states, they probably have made habits of an enormous amount of what they're doing so that their attention can be focused on those extremely exquisite distinctions that they're making when they're playing the piano or they're operating or whatever it is that they might be doing. Because that is the thing about habits, is that because they free the mind. And so that's part of their value. So I'm sure there is a lot of connection, though I've never heard of that before. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi. So in your experience, are these categories out of emotions, sentiments, or like very natural, or like based on some kind of a situation?
The categories?
Yeah.
It's how, when you get an expectation, how do you respond? So somebody says to you, this is due Friday, or it's not polite not to eat dessert when you go to a friend's house, or you're supposed to go to, it's time for you to wake up. How do you respond to that? So it's how do you respond to that expectation, or the expectation coming from within yourself? I want to start running. I want to start doing yoga. So it's really that this is really only looking at expectations.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Hi, Gretchen. Thank you for speaking with us today. I'm a questioner, so that was a little tough for me to wait in line.
Okay, good. Yeah, do you hate to wait in line?
Yeah, I hate it.
Oh, so why is that? Okay, anyway, with a side note, but
yeah.
It's just this weird thing that I keep picking up. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience as a LinkedIn influencer and what you take away from maybe some of the engagement you see in comments on your post, and if that relates into LinkedIn members being more one side of the Rubin index than others.
Right.
So thank you.
I love being a LinkedIn influencer. I have to say that I don't often read comments that are not on my site, because it's a big, crazy world out there, and when you're on a site like LinkedIn, where people feel like you're under the aegis of a big corporation, they are more likely to be very ugly, even when they're identified and stuff like that. And I can't manage that very easily. On my site, there's such a strong ethic that people really behave themselves. But I have trouble with it on email. I don't often get mean emails, but I end up reading them because I don't know they're mean until it's too late. Somebody called me toothy. I am toothy, but you don't have to send me an email telling me that I'm toothy. And she didn't say it in a nice way. So I don't always read all the comments, because usually they're fine, but every once in a while you get something that's just really vicious and mean, and it's so, there's something called the negativity bias. in psychology, which is the idea that bad is stronger than good, that our attention is more captured by negative things than by positive things. We remember criticism more than praise. We remember bad news more than good news. And so, it's hard when there's lots and lots of comments. If just even a few of them are kind of vicious, it really can change. It can change it. And also, I feel like the kind of stuff that I write about, I need to be very open-hearted and very honest. And if I feel like I'm going to be attacked when that happens, it's going to close me down. So I'm very careful about not opening up myself up too much to open the open range. So I don't have a sense so much from the LinkedIn, because I wouldn't go through and like sort of add them up in my mind, because I'd be too scared with what I might find there.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk today. I have a question about personally yourself. When you meet people or when you your own relationships, do you see yourself categorizing people and manipulating them?
Oh, more I think that I become a bore, because I'll be at, like, my husband and I'll be at dinner with some friends, and I'm like, hey, wait a minute, can I tell you about my categories? And let's talk about it, and he's like a martyr to it at this point. I don't think that I manipulate them, though I'm not sure that I wouldn't if I had the good chance to do it. But I do feel like it's really helpful in understanding how best to get someone on board. I mean, I just now when I see that someone's an obliger or something like that, I always wanted to say to them, like, well, what's the external accountability? Or I often want to talk to them about how they could reframe a situation in their mind. For instance, an obliger will often see what they're doing as sacrifice. They will say, I am sacrificing myself for others. Well, that's not necessarily what's happening. Maybe what's happening is I can stick to it when I have external accountability. When there is no external accountability, I can't do it. So those are two very, very different things. And so what I find is that sometimes I have to watch out, and then I don't start really being too aggressive in trying to promote my idea of how to see a situation. It's not that I'm trying to manipulate them, but I might become a very tiresome conversationalist. Yeah.
Thank you.
How do the categories relate to extroversion and introversion?
Okay, so this is an interesting thing. People ask me that all the time. I don't think they do relate to extroversion, introversion. And also, whenever I write about it, people are always wanting to map it onto, like, Myers-Briggs or all these other things. And really, I think, especially with a test like mine, which has no pretense to be scientific, it's just, I'm just trying to present an insight into human nature. I think to try to make them all match into each other or to have everything line up, you kind of lose the nuance of what every test is trying to get at. So I wouldn't try to do that. And I don't think that it does match up with introversion and extroversion. Because from what I've seen, there are people in all these categories who are both extroverted and introverted. So I don't think it maps up that way.
Thanks.
Hi. I'm thinking about I'm curious about what you're thinking about now and how you're thinking about pushing forward this theory. Is there going to be any follow-up books on like how to raise rebel children?
Oh, right. Are you a rebel?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Raising rebel children. Only a rebel would want that.
Good business opportunity for you.
Right. No. So this book that I'm writing now, Before and After, is what it really is. It's like 16 strategies that you would use as you're thinking about your habits, and it, like, whatever the habit might be. Like maybe you want to exercise more, or you want to go to sleep on time, or whatever it might be. I forgot to mention in my talk, the most habits that I find fall into the big 4 categories. 1, eating and drinking more healthfully. 2, exercise better. 3, get real rest and relaxation, like real restorative leisure, which is not the same thing as falling asleep in front of Law and Order reruns at midnight. And then finally, like the blanket to break a habit of procrastination in some area, like so that you make consistent progress in whether it's launching and starting a personal blog or getting back to meditation or whatever it is. So what I wanted to do was figure out, okay, like let's say you want to do any of those or ones that aren't part of the big 4. How would you even think about it? So I have all these strategies: scheduling, monitoring, pairing, others. Safeguards, which is where the loopholes come in, so you can watch out for loopholes and catch yourself when you're in a loophole. And this is the very first strategy, is the strategy of self-knowledge. Because I really do believe, as I argued, that you can't really start to change your habits unless you really come from a place of understanding yourself and your own nature. And so it's part of this book, Before and After, where I try to say, okay, now presumably if you're reading this book, you want to change a habit, know yourself so that as you move forward and think about all these strategies, you can think about the ones that are going to be the most productive for you, because it's going to depend what because everybody's trying to give advice like, well, I think you should keep your gym clothes in a gym bag packed the night before, and that's the secret to regular exercise. And you're like, yeah, really? Is that the secret to regular exercise? I don't think so. It really turns out to be much more complicated. So anyway, these four categories are part of that book.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. Since we are talking about habits, I've always been told by so many people it only takes 15 or 20 days to make or break a habit.
Yeah.
I want to know if it's really true.
No.
And how do different people in the different categories that you just said react to it? 'Cause
Absolutely.
I've tried, and I'm kind of a questioner.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
So it's a little confusing if that's just a general observation, or is there something different that the people in different categories should be doing?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, there was a study done. There's sort of an urban myth that it takes 21 days to form a habit. There's sort of different days floating around, as you say. And they did a study specifically on that, and it turns out that on average it takes 66 days to form a habit. But actually that is not a helpful number at all. That's like saying, on average, people are 5'6". It's like, well, that doesn't tell me how tall I am. 66 days, and they were looking at habits like drink more water, do sit-ups in the morning, eat fruit, things like that. Well, and what did they find out? Well, on average, it takes 66 days, but some people took much longer, and some people didn't take as long at all, and it kind of depended on what the habit was. And then, and this is a perfect illustration of my frustration with the fact that there's no recognition of the fact of the range of human nature. There's a little footnote where it says, some people seem to be particularly habit resistant. You think? I think so. I think that's true. So this is a study that basically it shows that the 21 days thing is not kind of a hard and fast rule, but it doesn't really tell us much about how long it would take a particular person to form a particular habit, because the answer is it depends on the person, it depends on the habit, it depends on the circumstances.
Hi. Just wondering if wanted to unpack a little bit the accountability stuff for the obligers.
Yes.
And specifically the relative weighting between the accountability piece of it versus the external piece of it.
Yes.
That's a very, could it be internal?
That's a very insightful point, yes.
Because I have an obliger friend who has created this very elaborate system for himself to make sure he exercises and eats well. It's just a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
No one sees it. It's just him, but it totally works for him. He has a cuss jar that he, every time he cusses.
Yeah.
And he knows himself really well. It works.
Yes.
But for him, it's about just the system as opposed to anything external.
Well, that is a very good point, because this is the thing where you see a range among obligers. Because some obligers are like that. All they need to do, there just needs to be just something where they can see it reflected. There's some kind of accountability. So they can't hold themselves accountable sort of in the abstract, but they can create these external forms of accountability where there's really nobody at the other end except themselves. Most obligers are not like that. Most obligers, there really needs to be somebody else on the other side of that. And because I would say to obligers, well, what if you put it on your calendar? Because I feel like an obligation to sort of, my calendar is an abstract thing. If it's on the calendar, it sort of happens. A lot of obligers, they're like, nah, if nobody's gonna notice if I don't show up, it doesn't matter. And some obligers, it's really, there has to be consequences. They have to know that someone is going to take them to task. Another way they differ is, for some obligers, their duty as a role model is very, very important to them. So the idea that their children would see them doing something is very important to them. Others, that's not so important. For some obligers, the idea that there's some kind of financial penalty is really important. Others, it's almost like they feel like, oh, well, if I pay to go to the gym, it's practically the same thing as going to the gym. So for them, it doesn't work. So the obligers really have to think about, well, what am I responding to? And it's hard because it can require other people to participate in order to create these systems of accountability. So often something like a coach or a trainer or an accountability partner or a group like Weight Watchers or AA, or like if you're going to do a habits group, something like that is going to be the most persuasive. But there do seem to be obligers. I know one obliger, fascinating obliger. I wanted to put her under a microscope. Her sense of duty, she's highly moral. Everything she does for high moral reasons. But if she doesn't feel like it's morally required, she thinks it's not important. So like she would never be late because she feels like that shows disrespect for other people and that's a moral issue. But she doesn't think she has to go to the gym because that's merely prudential, is what she said. So obligers also, maybe I need to think about this like with questioners, like how obligers fall into a spectrum, because some sort of are easily held accountable, and then others it's practically like they have to have somebody calling on the phone being like, you know, I'm looking at my watch and where are you? So that's a very good point. Okay, last question.
So I love this kind of stuff, like categorizing people. I'm always talking to my friends.
Yeah,
about
the world is divided into two categories of people. People like to divide the world into two categories, and
right?
People who don't. Yeah,
exactly. Except I'm a rebel, so that doesn't quite make sense.
You're a rebel?
Yeah.
Oh,
all the time.
Excellent.
But I'm wondering how you got into this. You did law, and then you wanted to be a writer. What was the thing that really started you off into categorizing people into, you know, different types?
I was a lawyer because I didn't know what else I wanted to do, and as an upholder, it was like, oh, maybe I should take the LSAT. Maybe I should apply law school. Oh, we're going to law school. Why not go? I'll keep my options open. What can it hurt? I can always change my mind later. You know, and then I ended up as a lawyer. It was great. And then at some point, my internal sense of my own obligation to myself that I wanted to be a writer, I was sort of in denial about the fact that I wanted to be a writer for a very long time. But then finally the desire to be a writer became so strong that, and at that point I had an idea for a book, which was also very highly categorizing people, which was called Power, Money, Fame, Sex, A User's Guide. And it was all about looking at people through these things. Fascinating. But I think I've always looked at the world that way and always been trying to figure out, like, what are the taxonomies? And I really think, like, with these 16 strategies, somebody said to me, 16 strategies is too many. No one's going to want to read your book. And I was like, but it's like the periodic table of the elements. You don't get to decide, like, 100 is a good round number. Let's have 100 elements. It's like, well, there's 16 in the world, you know. So I really do feel like I'm looking for these categories, and they're actually there, that I'm discovering them, not inventing them. But it is a huge thing in all my writing, is always trying to understand how to best understand human nature. So that's the last one. So sorry, that's the last one.
Yeah, sorry, we don't have time for more questions. I'm sorry. But Gretchen will stay around for a little bit. Just wanted to thank you so much again for coming. A round of applause for Gretchen.
Thank you.
Definitely looking forward to your new book to coming out, and hopefully you guys all have some good inspiration for Wellness In Day tomorrow. And as I said, Gretchen will be staying for about a half hour to sign some books, so we're just going to move a table up here, and then we can form a line by the table. Thanks, everyone.